After an entire decade of Five Nights at Freddy's, there's a lot of lore to unpack that millions of theorists have tried to solve, although I think I've actually solved it all. Today is the second part of this miniseries, where we're solving the sequel, Five Nights at Freddy's 2, from back in 2014, including the biggest question, who caused the bite of 87? Each month will be dedicated to a single game until the big timeline video releasing December 19th at 5 PM UTC. So please subscribe so you don't miss an upload, and for us to hit 300k before the end of the year, like the video and consider becoming a channel member if you enjoy. But in order to figure out which story I'm going to tell there, let's begin solving the timeline here. Although remember, as always, this is just a theory, and my interpretation of the evidence. Even if you disagree, I hope it gives you something new to think about. So as we all know, we play as a security guard named Jeremy Fitzgerald, within the brand new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza that opens up in 1987, being a prequel to the first game, but coming after the MCI and the first Freddy's location that we explored in the first video. This location features new versions of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, who unfortunately gets ripped apart by kids constantly, to the point that the staff leave him broken and frame her as a take apart put back together attraction that they dub the Mangle, as well as two new characters in the crew, Balloon Boy and the Puppet, called in universe the Marionette according to the second movie, as well as an extra third Balloon Boy's secret partner in crime, JJ. As we learn from the younger phone guy, Ralph, these new animatronics are equipped with advanced facial recognition features, directly tied to a criminal database, with advanced mobility and the ability to free roam during the day. These new set of animatronics are dubbed the Toys, exclusively in the custom night menu, interestingly being referenced in FNAF 4, when we see a child with toy versions of Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica without a beak, referencing Toy Chica without her beak within this game, as well as a Foxy toy elsewhere that looks similar to Mangle, which I theorized to mean that these new animatronics were actually based off of the old toys from years ago, to then lead to them having the toy prefix here and only here. This could even be referenced in the second FNAF movie too, where we can read blueprints of the animatronics, with one specifically about Toy Chica, whose beak is detachable as an intentional design choice. But besides the toy animatronics, the old classics from the 1985 Freddy's return, who have since gotten a new look. And Ralph informs us that they were way too ugly now, leading Fazbear Entertainment to scrap them, causing them to become withered by the time of the gameplay, and they instead pivoted to the new kid-friendly toy animatronics that we've been talking about, despite them already attempting to add the new technology to the old animatronic systems too. Although, the second movie recently added some confusion to the discussion, by making the Withereds an entirely different and unpossessed set of animatronics. So let's quickly make sure that we are correct in assuming they're the same as the 1985 and later 1993 animatronics before we move on. Not only does Ralph directly state that
those are from the previous location,
meaning that they weren't prototypes made for the 87 location like the movies, but he also specifically mentions
but they were just so ugly, you know? And the smell.
Which is a direct reference to the hidden newspapers in FNAF 1 that tell us after the bodies were stuffed into the suits, foul odor began to come from them. On top of this, the final newspaper of the game then says that the original characters are being kept in hopes of a possible reorganization of the company, which directly confirms that not only are the Withereds the original characters from 83 to 85, but also go on to be the reintroduced characters in 93. Still not convinced? Well, the biggest smoking gun comes from the later game Ultimate Custom Night, where within Withered Chica speaks and reveals,
I was the first. I have seen everything.
Coming from Susie, alongside Withered Bonnie, who questions,
what is this new prison? Is it me trapped or is it you? Perhaps it's us both.
Coming from Jeremy, meaning that the Withereds have the souls of the MCI within them, meaning that they're 100% the classics. We can then further debunk using the Withereds plot in the movie universe for the games, as they're the prototypes and version 1.0 of the Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy characters, despite us learning within the latest installment, Secret of the Mimic, that the prototypes of those characters actually share the same designs as the classics, which we also established in the previous video. As to why the movie split them into two sets, I don't know. although they do end up doing the same thing with Michael's character too. But either way, with all of that and the fact that the movies don't even account for Golden Freddy, who is specifically grouped with the Withereds and the classics due to being stuffed alongside the others in the games, we can safely say that the classic animatronics indeed become the Withereds, before later becoming the classics again for FNAF 1. Although as we learn through the nights, the first guard of the location, who finished his week, the week prior to the gameplay, meaning this location only remains open for 2 weeks total, tells Ralph that the toy animatronics have started randomly acting aggressive to adults, and even moving around at night, entering his office. This causes said guard to switch to the day shift, well, before he randomly goes missing as the week goes on, and some new investigations within the building progress. We learn through one of the rare death minigames, Save Them, that this prior guard is none other than the murderer William Afton himself, with his first official appearance in the series as the purple guy. Note his security badge while in the FNAF 2 location. This is definitely him, likely under the alias Dave Miller, similar to the novel trilogy where he also acts as a guard. But a question this raises is why? Why are these new animatronics acting aggressive, and why is William even in this building after being heavily suspected and almost definitely questioned at the very least of murdering 5 children, which is even reiterated in the Foxy Go 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 death minigame. The reason for this is actually because William kills another 5 kids in this location, dubbed the Dead Children's Incident, DCI for short, that end up possessing the 5 new toy animatronics. The 6th, the puppet, we'll talk about specifically later. This is surprisingly a highly debated topic, both whether there even is another 5 kids that die, and also whether the toy animatronics are even possessed. But I do believe we have enough within these games to tell us that this is the case. So let's begin investigating with the very minigame that we see William is working in this building, Save Them. Within this minigame that takes place at the FNAF 2 location, we can look around and find 5 dead bodies with a bunch of blood spread throughout the building. None of the toys are moving around at night by this point in time, besides Mangle, who begins to move left and right, implying this is the starting point of their possession and their ability to roam at night. In fact, the name for Mangle moving around in the files is literally titled He Was Here, which confirms it's specifically because of William that Mangle begins moving. But are we sure this event is even real? Or is it just minigame shenanigans? Well, something not many people noticed about this minigame is that within all the party rooms we see each room has 2 tables, and we even see this corresponds to the gameplay itself, where each party room, even the dining area, has 2 tables each. Well, that's until we get to party room 4, and we can see there's only 1 table in this room. But why? Why is this pattern broken? Well, coincidentally in Save Them, we can see that this exact table is the only one that just happens to have blood underneath it, meaning it was likely taken out to hide evidence, and would then confirm that this minigame does actually take place exactly how we see it, and further proves that it takes place before the gameplay of FNAF 2 begins, where said table is now removed from the building. And to simply solidify that fact, I should remind you that you can get all of these minigames on night 1, meaning the events shown off in all of them are 100% required to take place prior to the gameplay. Not only that, but Save Them itself directly shows us that the night guard at the time of its events is none other than William himself. Again, meaning that it's prior to the gameplay, when William was still the guard, and so giving us the answer to the mysterious first guard we've been hearing about through the game. As a side note to all of that, Save Them is also the only minigame that Scott specifically didn't add any instructional text to, possibly further implying that the events being shown off within this minigame are a more literal depiction than the others are, similar to Follow Me in the following game. Some may counter this line of thinking by mentioning that there's blood on the puppet's box in the prize corner within the minigame too, so why wasn't that removed? But it should be noted that it's coincidentally a different box between the minigame and the gameplay, being another example of a change between the minigame and the gameplay coincidentally occurring to an item that has a blood pool surrounding it, the box getting replaced since it's an integral part of the establishment, being used for a performing animatronics mechanics, and so requiring more than a simple clean, while a table wouldn't be too hard to clean up. But just in case, it's then put away into Kids Cove, explaining why that external room has a single table, despite having none in Save Them. It all comes together. The bloody one was cleaned up and then discreetly put away in the kids area. But either way, we can also see the puppet floating around in this minigame too, traveling throughout the building, hinting that she's likely trying to guide these new kids to life within the toys, just like she did for the MCI, explaining what the minigame's title, Save Them, actually means. Save Them being about the toys' possession also furthers the hidden pattern within the death minigames, making half of them about the new characters, while the other half are about the old for an even split. We even learn shown in the later game FNAF AR Special Delivery that when trying to replicate the FNAF 2 animatronics, they literally cannot replicate Mangle properly due to her seemingly impossible movements. Quote, the original was purportedly able to move along the ceiling, and from what I'm seeing here, we're having issues getting our rebuilds to even move on level ground properly, which hints that Mangle's ability to move around at all in FNAF 2, let alone on the walls and the ceilings, is due to a supernatural factor, which makes sense considering the other supernatural abilities that they have in FNAF 2, such as Mangle's movements like we just explained, Toy Chica taking off her own beak, as well as the multiple frames featuring the silver glowing pupils and camera disruption that are characteristics shared with the FNAF 1 animatronics due to their possession. Not only that, but in FNAF AR we also got an event literally called Haunted Forest, which featured skins for the toy animatronics as well. Not only all of that, but Ralph directly tells us throughout the nights that new rumors have begun circulating locally about something tragic happening, which he assures has nothing to do with their establishment, despite said rumors trying to connect it to them. The reason this vague tragic event is being connected to Freddys first and foremost fits perfectly with that event being a new set of kids going missing, as we know the locals would have genuine reasoning to suspect them with the knowledge of the MCI happening at the 1985 Freddys, only a couple years prior. This also explains why simple rumors are enough to then cause the police to legitimately get involved and put the entire building under investigation without any evidence, and also explains why the entire location gets quickly closed down when it's discovered that someone used a spare yellow suit in the back. That was what caused all of them to begin acting wrong, as hinted throughout the week, which since it was a springlock suit used, they likely noticed that the springlocks were wound back for someone to get in and use it, meaning it's an exact repeat of the 1985 murders, and they know it, immediately announcing the closure the following day with the excuse of the animatronics malfunctioning due to their inherent aggression towards adults, which unknowingly to them is because of their possession caused by an adult, and also foreshadows the bite that then occurs the next day to an adult at the final birthday party that they're hosting. This also directly mirrors the MCI, both locations closing directly because of a group of children going missing at said locations while a yellow suit is reported to have been used. Speaking of the yellow suit, it's also likely that William used the Fredbear suit, Golden Freddy, to commit the DCI, mainly due to the fact that the following game informs us that the Spring Bunny suit was last seen inside a safe room, well, before it was sealed up, which is then where we still see it in the Follow Me minigames that happen after the events of FNAF 1, meaning the only suit he could actually use at the FNAF 2 location would have been Golden Freddy. Not only that, but we can see this directly shown with a child drawing an image of Golden Freddy, literally speaking and luring away a single child, while the other kids are distracted by a stage performance and looking in the other direction. To further this, Ralph states within this game that
We had a spare in the back, a yellow one.
which directly implies that they only had one yellow suit at this location, and further backs that Spring Bonnie was still in the safe room at this time. This call also playing the exact same night that Golden Freddy just happens to become active, and is actually more likely to spawn in, directly furthering that very connection. Then we can actually use FNAF's most known Easter egg for lore too, as within FNAF 1 when you type 1987 into the custom night menu, Golden Freddy jump scares you. This theory then actually bringing an importance to his character within that year, which is otherwise missing. Not only that, but Ticket to Fun then has a children's activity book have writing made from seemingly agony. Say, I saw another Freddy, with the answer being golden, directly across from a mention of the bite of 87. This also isn't the only time that he'd wear Fredbear to lure kids either, as we saw him use it for one of the kids in the novel trilogy too. Spring Bunny is simply just his favourite, which is why he gets it in Follow Me. Suit use aside though, the DCI is even referenced in the week before, with Ralph specifically mentioning how the franchise has truly fallen on hard times, thanks to those pernicious rumours about missing kids, and the lingering bad press from the bite of 87, which is quite interesting considering the MCI weren't rumours, and were confirmed kidnappings reported in the news, while the DCI would have always stayed as just rumours to the locals, which the mention of these rumours just happens to be directly next to a mention of the bite of 87, two events that are directly connected to each other. This event is also hinted at within the novel trilogy, where after kidnapping and killing the 5 kids for the classics in 1985, William still continues to later kidnap another group of kids. And speaking of, a quick side note is that we can potentially name the DCI kids as Ron, Alana, Jacob, Lisa, and Jessica, the next set of 5 that end up kidnapped and grouped together by William in the 4th closet, which was possibly actually referenced in the later game Into the Pit with the Rescue the Children minigame, assumedly showing us 3 girls and 2 boys. That's similar to Save Them, just happened to be spread all throughout a maze, us then using an animatronic avatar, like we do with Withered Freddy, to try to rescue them from Spring Bonnie, representing William, which upon completing said minigame, you even get rewarded with a music track that just happens to be titled Save Them. Not only that, but the second movie then has a small group of investigators come into the building and meet terrible fates. One of these also being called Lisa, another called Rob, similar to Ron, and the last called Alex, which isn't directly connected obviously, but could maybe be a reference to the first initial for Alana. But names aside, and something everyone missed, is that in the opening minigame for FNAF 6, we actually get a representation of all the important deaths in FNAF. The first round having 3 kids to represent the ungrouped 3, Charlie, Crying Child, and Elizabeth. The second round having 5 kids to represent the MCI, which just happens to spawn the Shadow Bear character, a reference to Shadow Freddy's first appearance being with the MCI in FNAF 2, and then the final full round having another 5 kids to represent the DCI, which then causes the game to glitch out, referencing Shadow Bonnie's glitch minigame, a reference to Shadow Bonnie being modeled after the DCI possessed Toy Bonnie. Although since this is a highly debated topic, let's do something I don't usually do, and actually talk about some counters to this theory, in order to help us solidify it. People say there's a chance that these bodies in Save Them are actually the MCI, and for some reason William takes them out of the animatronics, for when the company remodels the classics into the Withereds, likely to hide any remaining evidence. Although the issue with this interpretation is that we don't actually have anything to really back this up, considering within this very minigame, we can see the classics are already the Withereds, meaning he'd be too late to hide the bodies anyways. It's also stated that the Withereds still smelt gross by the time of FNAF 2, due to the dead bodies that we know made quite the smell in 1985, which does imply that the company already worked on and searched the animatronics themselves, seemingly finding nothing like an obvious dead body inside, meaning it assumedly rotted away already. Not only that, but we can then see that Foxy is already mangled by this point in time by the kids, that the company had already pivoted to the toys after the Withereds, and that William is an active night guard, all meaning that the location is not only open, but the company's involvement with the Withereds is all already finished, further proving that William would be cleaning them up too late. This theory also doesn't explain not only the puppets' involvement in the minigame, and the Save Them title in itself, since the classics are already possessed years prior, even shown in this minigame, with Withered Freddy freely moving around the building, but also the fact that there's fresh blood all throughout the location. If the bodies have been rotting for years by this point, then there's absolutely no reason for them to still be bleeding everywhere as if it were fresh murders. Not only all that, but Save Them even includes something that I've yet to mention specifically to argue this very theory. There is not just 5 blood pools, there's actually 6, revealing a hidden 6th kid's death, which William already covered up, hinting to the audience that he's going to cover up the remaining 5 that can simply be connected to the hidden 6th toy animatronic in the game, JJ, who just happens to hide under a table just like one of the blood pools are placed, which that extra blood pool has no explanation under this alternate theory, since there's only 5 dead kids for the only 5 animatronics with the MCI, no secret 6th like the toys have. People also claim that the toys are acting aggressive because of the system glitch that Ralph mentions in the game, although it should be noted this is directly stated by Ralph himself to simply be a theory that was brought up by the engineers to figure out what could be going on, since he even claims that what the toys are doing should be literally impossible.
Now, from what we know, that should be impossible.
Directly hinting that something more supernatural is at play. And Ralph trying to justify and make an excuse for possession isn't new, considering he does the exact same thing with the FNAF 1 animatronics too. People also say that the DCI aren't brought up again, possibly meaning that they never existed. Although it should be noted that the DCI have a self-contained story within FNAF 2, and so they have no reason to return later in the story, since their stories are completed, being killed prior to the gameplay as shown off in Save Them, possessing the toys and causing their aggression throughout the week, and then likely moving on once the animatronics are scrapped, as we read about about in the final newspaper of the game. Unlike the MCI, who have a reason to come back in the story, since they specifically weren't scrapped and are remodeled again for FNAF 1. It's never directly shown in the game itself, since the concept of a happiest day didn't actually exist at the time, but it's likely that they had their own happiest day of sorts after the toys were scrapped. Them being scrapped in itself subtly implying that they were put to rest. Although the more likely option is that their spirits possibly lingered within the shells of the animatronics that we then just happen to see reappear in FNAF 3, before eventually being burned out of them with a FNAF 3 fire, which we learn in FNAF 6 fire burns Remnant out. This being reiterated in the 4th closet, where Afton states that heat is the key to everything, and quote, "If you keep all this at just the right temperature, it's malleable, it's moldable, and it's highly effective." Or maybe contagious is the word, where we also see that once it gets too hot, the spirits eventually move on. This also isn't the only time in the series, where more missing children are featured within the game itself, but then we never hear of them again outside of said game, despite us knowing they definitely exist. But we'll save that for the sister location and security breach videos, so subscribe so you don't miss them. That's not all people say though, as another counter to the toys being possessed by the new kids is the theory that they're instead possessed by pieces of the MCI, due to parts of the Withereds being used for the toys. Although it should be noted that the novel trilogy tells us that the spirits have to willingly give a piece of themselves up in order to successfully split their own souls, and or transfer to another body, which is directly backed up with the Fazbear Fright epilogues, having Andrew state that he was able to split his soul across multiple items because he wanted to be everywhere. And the reason they do this in the novel trilogy, and so likely the games too, via the tricks we're told William used in Follow Me, is because William specifically manipulates them to do so. Although for the toy animatronics, pieces of the Withereds are taken by random engineers, purely for random spare parts if needed, and not at all for any soul-splitting purposes, especially since William doesn't act as an engineer in the location, and instead as a simple guard, meaning there's no motivation for the spirits to randomly give a piece of themselves up and split their souls between multiple machines. Honestly, I really feel like if Scott didn't want us thinking there was a DCI, he wouldn't have shown us the MCI happening at a 1985 Freddy's, since the Foxy Go 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 minigame shows a Red Foxy in Pirate's Cove that then get helped by the puppet, but then also show us in the exact same game that 5 kids are freshly killed and can be found at the FNAF 2 Freddy's, and in need of the puppet's help and saving, purposefully separating the two events. But more proof for all of this then comes with the final new animatronic introduced in this game, the puppet. Within the Take Cake to the Children minigame, we see a child stuck outside of one of the many restaurants, which we'll talk more about this later, before William drives by and kills them, causing a jump scare from the puppet to symbolize that this child ends up possessing it. As we later learn in the story, this kid is Charlie Emily, daughter of the other co-founder of Fazbear Entertainment, Henry Emily, as revealed in the later FNAF 6. The name Henry is most likely inspired from the fact that the puppet's main lullaby, My Grandfather's Clock, is created by a man named Henry, his full name being Henry Clay Work, which I personally think got split into Henry and then the police chief in the novel trilogy, Clay Burke. But fun facts aside though, and Charlie's story is expanded upon within FNAF 6 as well, and also the Ticket to Fun activity book, showing us that the puppet, originally called the security puppet, was first created to keep kids inside the building, reacting to their wristbands that were handed out to keep track of all party attendees, likely being tweaked by Henry to specifically prioritize keeping Charlie inside, probably while he works, with her exclusive green wristband that we see within the minigame that none of the other kids have. Although when a bunch of bullies trap the puppet in its box and seemingly force Charlie outside, she's then stuck outside. The puppet then eventually breaks free and heads outside for her, only to find the tire marks left by William's car heading away from the now dead body of Charlie, who it breaks down next to as the minigame ends, causing the eventual possession. It should be noted that this would then make all 6 new kids introduced in FNAF 2 all follow the exact same pattern of not being directly stuffed inside of the animatronics, like the MCI were, but all 6 instead dying in proximity, still causing the possession to work. This works way too well with William's motivations that we'll get into in a later video, but for now it seems relatively simple from not only an evidence standpoint and exploring alternative interpretation standpoint, but also from a storytelling standpoint, that FNAF 1 introduces us to 5 animatronics, and then reveals to us 5 kids being killed to connect them as the possessors, with FNAF 2 then introducing us to 6 brand new animatronics, and then showing us 6 new kids being killed to also connect them as the possessors, as well as an extra blood pool connecting a hidden 7th kid's death to the hidden 7th toy animatronic, JJ. Speaking of Charlie specifically though, we also have another hidden minigame called Give Gifts, Give Life. Within this minigame, we can see the puppet giving gifts to the children, and giving them life within the machines. As we know from basically every single continuity at this point, William is the one to stuff the children into the suits to hide the evidence of his murders. So what does this minigame mean? It seems most likely that while William stuffed them into the suits, the puppet in this minigame, as well as represented through the dream cutscenes throughout the game, is the one who guides their spirits to give them agency within the animatronics, to give them full control and wake them up, if you will. In the Tales from the Pizza Blacks short story Alone Together, we even read that ghosts aren't able to move on because they don't have their memories, unless their bodies are found. Although later on in the series, the MCI are allowed to move on despite their bodies never being found, which in my opinion would be Scott trying to imply that at some point they were found. And so if the public never did, Charlie would likely be showing them their bodies within the suits that they possess, so that they can know who they are and the fact that they're dead, explaining why in the week before, when Susie's name is mentioned, quote, Chica lets out an anguished scream and smashes the cupcake with a hand. She storms out of the kitchen, wailing, which implies she does know who she is in some capacity. This would then cleanly tie all of the FNAF 2 minigames together as showing off the puppet's story up to this point. Take Cake to the Children shows us Charlie dies and possesses the puppet. Give Gifts, Give Life shows us Charlie giving the first set of dead kids agency within the animatronics. Foxy Go 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 showing us how she did so by representing her showing them their bodies. With the Into the Pit game even reiterating this by having Oswald, who continuously represents Foxy throughout the game, also walk in and find the MCI bodies, and then save them, showing us they successfully possess the animatronics, only for it to happen all over again to more kids that Charlie now has to go around to help with. But from the events of Give Gifts, Give Life, she then stays around as the protectors for the MCI, just like Henry mentions when talking about this very event later in FNAF 6, stating how she's been carrying them in her arms. This is then later reiterated in Ultimate Custom Night with her quote,
The others are under my protection.
As you can probably tell, it's not exactly clear on what happens in Give Gifts, Give Life, especially since it seems to be a metaphorical scene playing out, similar to Happiest Day with their mask going on, but it does seem that while the spirits were already possessing and lost within the animatronics in some way, Charlie basically helped them assume a form of consciousness and a last life within said animatronics. At the end of the day, it's supernatural shenanigans, so the rules aren't exactly clear or going to be easy to understand, and therefore not easy to explain, especially since this was only the second game in the franchise, but I do think this was the simplest way I could explain it. But continuing on with the conversation of Charlie, timeline-wise, this minigame would then imply that she died prior to the MCI in 1985, in order to do any of this once they do die, right? Well, let's take a look through the evidence. First of all, we know that it's a requirement that Charlie must die prior to FNAF 2 itself, due to her death minigame being able to appear on any night, even night 1, and Ralph's line on night 2 stating that,
I'll be honest, I never liked that puppet thing. It's always thinking.
A hint at its possession. But what if she simply dies prior to the gameplay but still in the same year and same building? Well, not only is it more likely she dies years prior, which we'll expand on in a moment, but Ralph's statement,
We're going to try to contact the original restaurant owner. I think the name of the place was Fredbear's Family Diner or something like that. It was closed for years though. I doubt we'll be able to track anybody down.
Wouldn't make too much sense if Henry, the co-owner himself, was actively in the building working and even making the security puppet for Charlie only a week ago. Since remember, the location was opened for only 2 weeks. To solidify this further, the right of the puppet's box in the FNAF 2 location is Kids Cove, while in the security puppet minigame we can see that it's instead the exit of the building and a random window. And looking at the location's layout, if the puppet is in the southeast corner, then there's no possible way for its right to be that entrance/exit. But need more proof? Well, the cherry on top is that Midnight Murderous must take place later that night of Charlie's murder, and with the name of the minigame itself, it's basically told to us that he's driving away at midnight. However, due to Charlie's death being able to appear on night 1, therefore it occurs before the game starts, means that if Charlie dies at this location, she must die the first week of operations, aka when William was the night guard. However, this in itself then creates the giant issue that it requires William to be in 2 places at one time. 1 at Freddy starting his night shift as a guard, and 2 driving far away from any establishment, heading home drunk. These two situations cannot coexist. Not only that, but it also wouldn't make sense motivation-wise for William to discreetly kill 5 kids together for the classics, another 5 to 6 kids together for the toys, but then kill a single kid with nothing covering his tracks, no suit worn or anything similar to the others, and leaving the body near no animatronic either, implying that it's just a sloppy first kill, before he has his killing method established with all of their supernatural purposes like he has for every other kill or even capture past this point. For those who counter this line of thinking due to the fact that the bear character in a death minigame moves around during operational hours, meaning it's more likely one of the toys, who were specifically announced to free roam during the day, and therefore her death takes place at the FNAF 2 location, I should reinforce that last video we were able to establish and prove that the classic animatronics could also move around during operational hours as well, in a similar fashion to the Springlock animatronics roaming abilities, making this point moot. But if Charlie doesn't die at the FNAF 2 location in 1987, then when and where does she die? Well, luckily for us, we seemingly get an answer with Henry's insanity speech in FNAF 6. Within this speech, Henry talks about William's evil, and the monster that he unwillingly helped create. Although interestingly enough, within this speech he states,
"I could make myself sleep, but not yet. Not until I undo what he has done and heal this wound. A wound first inflicted on me, but then one that I let bleed out to cause all of this."
This quote helps us understand that William's evil impacted Henry specifically first and foremost, causing the rest of the story to unfold with the MCI, as the rest of the speech is about, which, as we know, the wound caused to just Henry by William would of course be his own daughter's death. Meaning if William's evil was first inflicted on just Henry, Charlie was William's first murder. This can then be cross-referenced with the novel trilogy, where we learn that Charlie's death occurred before the MCI and specifically in the year 1983, which is also hinted at within the Ticket to Fun book, where we read about a failed MCI victim, Timmy, stating that he always plays the Midnight Motorist arcade game, which, as we all know, the lore section of said minigame takes place after Charlie's death, and is directly associated with it. Therefore, having the game mentioned here during the MCI is likely Scott trying to hint to us that her death takes place prior to it, especially with the following page mentioning how the arcades are basically haunted, and show glitches and messages that they shouldn't be, referencing those very lore sections within the minigames. Not only that, but there's also 2 things in Help Wanted 2 that tell us she does seemingly die in the year 1983, as not only do we directly input the year 1983 into a keypad in order to unlock the puppet memory, but this image hidden within the Freddy Cupcake Bonanza claw machine also shows us that by the time of assumedly Fall Fest 83, since it's focusing on the main 4 from the Freddys band, implying it's the first location where it was only the 4 of them, and that year was the entire basis of the first Help Wanted's DLC, where we first heard about Fall Fest, the puppet already has her tears and is already dead, implying that her death happens before the fall of 1983, and before the MCI. Further implied with this bird who's already landed, sitting still on the dead puppet, with 5 other birds still flying towards the performing cast, yet to land. Not only all of that, but FNAF 6 also hints at this further with its Lawkeeper ending, showing us 6 gravestones with names on them, 2 of which we can't make out. Following this, we then got 2 books before we got the next game, the Survival Logbook and the Fourth Closet. Within the Survival Logbook, we're shown a gravestone with my name to be revealed, eventually leading us to get Cassidy as we talked about in the last video, and the Fourth Closet not only doubling down on Cassidy, but then also revealing Charlie's gravestone with her death day on it, reading Beloved Daughter Charlotte Emily, 1980 to 1983, which the gravestone in FNAF 6 does seem to be longer than just Charlie. These books just happen to give us 2 important and highlighted gravestones that help reveal the names hidden on the final 2 gravestones from that image. And I don't think anyone's arguing that this final grave isn't Charlie's. Although something interesting to note here was that Charlie's death year in the novels got changed from 1982 to 1983 specifically just for this ending, which coincidentally made it now fit with the earliest date provided to us in the games at the time. But why change her year of death just for this one scene? Well, it was probably because he knew that this final gravestone would be connected to the games, to reveal its final gravestone. And so to ensure that no one could deny it belonged to Charlie, because it's an alternate timeline, he completely retconned her death year in the books to likely be accurate to her death year in the games, so that the gravestone could be entirely carried over without any debate. But that's not all FNAF 6 provides us either, as the game also features 3 different minigames that have secret lore within them, after their 3rd run. these being the Security Puppet minigame, the Midnight Motorist minigame, and the Fruity Maze minigame. The order I just told you is the opposite of how they're presented in the game's catalogue, but since we know Midnight Motorist must happen after Security Puppet, we can assume the catalogue is showing us the reverse order, making the real order Charlie's death via the Security Puppet, the aftermath via Midnight Motorist, which is already theorized and basically confirmed to happen after a death, and finally his next murder via Fruity Maze, all furthering that it's Charlie in 1983, a break in between for family law, and then the MCI in 1985. And just to solidify this, people may say the 1983 keypad code meaning 1983 is when Charlie died might be debunked, due to the white tiger leading appearing from 1979, despite that not being the year that David died. Although it should be noted that the white tiger plush is not actually a memory doll, unlike the puppet, and therefore isn't actually representing his death, which can be seen easily by just comparing them all together, as well as the fact that you don't get the memory achievement if you collect it first, unlike all the others, and it's instead simply just to tease the upcoming game, at the time, Secret of the Mimic, as shown with Jackie herself above the keypad, meaning the keypad is actually about the game's events, 1979 simply being the only date we had at the point in time as well, and so the whole update in itself purely just teasing the next game. But two other quick things that people have said against this solution is the grave order shown off in Help Wanted 2 and 5 Laps at Freddy's having the Midnight Motor contain a dice with an 87 on it. Although not only is there a detail in the grave order that people have missed, which renders that solution being the death order as way less likely, which I'm sorry but I'll get into properly in the Help Wanted 2 video itself, since there's a lot more yapping to do surrounding it, but said dice also contains 2 3s, specifically so a 3 can be put directly next to the 7, to therefore make the dice readable as both 1983 and 1987, the 3 even being first to appear in the car preview, a direct reference to the debate about the bite of 83 versus 87 that was caused by the 83 and 87 source code trolling leading up to FNAF 4, which instead connects the minigame to FNAF 4 and the characters within, which again we'll get into further in a future video. So this all then leaves one final question. Where does Charlie die? 2 locations were open in 1983, Fredbear's Family Diner and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. So which one did she die at? Well, in a death minigame we can see that within the building there's an active bear serving cake to children, who we'll call Cake Bear for now. Interestingly, Cake Bear's colour scheme just happens to be the exact same as classic Freddy's mask shown off in the Give Gifts Give Life minigame, as well as Withered Freddy in the Save Them minigame, purposefully separated from Toy Freddy, whose sprite is an entirely different colour in Save Them, and Golden Freddy, who is of course shown more golden and even likes a top hat in its sprite form from Save Them, hinting that Charlie may have died at the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And of course, that's not all, as leading up to FNAF 6's release, we got teasers showcasing a classic Freddy plushie being held on strings by the puppet, right before the next teaser showcased Cake Bear, connecting the two together and therefore implying Cake Bear is meant to be classic Freddy. Not only that, but in the same teaser there was now a rainbow behind him that specifically represents the colours of Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, the original band at the first Freddy's location, which is then doubled down when within the game we see this rainbow being used for the logo of the Fruity Maze minigame, which directly came from the first Freddy's, and showcases Susie from the MCI, further implying Cake Bear is indeed classic Freddy at the first Freddy's. Then we got a teaser showcasing Cake Bear now being a pizza bear, with him juggling pizza, directly before we got the teaser showing a new bear sprite from the opening minigame of a game literally titled Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, directly connecting Cake Bear and therefore Charlie's death to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. This was the purpose for all of those teasers. They were directly telling us, hey, here's classic Freddy having something to do with the puppet. Then here's who is already theorized to be classic Freddy being directly tied to the first band of 4. Then finally, here's said Freddy now juggling pizza, right before I'm going to show you a new sprite representing the exact same character in a new game about a Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. Not only all of that, but in the future Help Wanted 2 we even see this sprite make a return, being officially called Freddy in the Files. Although there's so much more that supports this theory as well, with it even being hinted at within the survival logbook, where we get coupons throughout seemingly naming the events of the story, take a bite out of fun on your next birthday, referencing the bite of 83 on the crying child's birthday, also being the only page title to specifically not name Freddy's, to further reinforce it. Slice up some family fun at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, referencing the MCI that occurs at Freddy's with, of course, William's knife. Grand reopening, join us at the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, then referencing the DCI at the grand reopening location, aka FNAF 2. Then we have take your family out for a night of fun at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, referencing Charlie, family of the co-owner of Freddy's, being taken out outside of Freddy's, which Midnight Motorist confirms happens at night 2. Not only that, but within that very minigame we see that Charlie dies in the alleyway outside of the building, that is then mirrored with the alleyway we find the scraps sitting in FNAF 6, possibly hinting that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place is a reused and refurbished Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Not only does this make sense of Henry's insanity speech, stating that he needs to
Call them all back.
right after talking about what happened to the classics at the FNAF 1 location, and also about Charlie, implying he's calling them back to the same building, but this theory then gets hinted at further with the Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogues, where within it describes the pizzeria as old, and also showcases that the pizza place actually has a safe room, which since no more safe rooms were made after the MCI in 85, then the building must be either a reused Fredbear's or the first ever Freddy's, since they are the only two locations to have a safe room. So if the theory is true that the FNAF 6 location is where Charlie dies, then that in itself requires Charlie to die at the first Freddy's location. This then connects back to the FNAF 6 teasers, showcasing Cake Bear being turned into a newer Pizza Bear, just like the first Freddy's gets turned into a newer Freddy's. This idea is then reiterated with Henry's speeches, mainly with his completionist speech, with the quote,
This place will not be remembered, and the memory of everything that started this can finally begin to fade away.
Implying that this building is indeed where all of this stuff started, and cross-referencing
Everything that started this
with his insanity speech about how Charlie was the first wound
that I let bleed out to cause all of this.
to further solidify that Charlie's death happened first and at the first Freddy's. Not only all of that, but in this same game we also got the OST for Charlie's death minigame that's specifically titled Alchemist Fantasy. In various ages and cultures, alchemists sought out an elixir of life that supposedly grants eternal life, immortality, and miraculously cures diseases. And so calling Charlie's death an alchemist fantasy, in the same game we hear Henry state her death was the first wound inflicted by William, is likely hinting that her death and then the possession of the puppet is actually the reason William first learns of the supernatural, and eventually leads to the MCI, aka bleeds out to
Cause all of this.
But back to FNAF 2, and we can also possibly use William's sprites as a timeline in themselves, his pinker form only being used at both Charlie's murder and the MCI, aka both earlier in the timeline and at the same location, while it's suddenly changed to his infamous purple form when he commits the DCI, aka later in the timeline at a whole other location. The following game even coincidentally continuing this trend by having his darkest form yet appear after the events of FNAF 1, aka the furthest in the timeline. This overall theory also explains the puppet memory in Help Hunter 2, being put next to both a Freddy painting and shattering Freddy teeth in the hub, possibly representing her dying at Freddy's and in the year of a confirmed bear bite, aka 1983. Additionally, the second movie also has Charlie's death take place in the quote original Freddy's location before the MCI occurred and before the MCI location even opened. All of this then properly explains why Charlie was with the MCI after they died to help give them life, directly shown to occur with the classics via Bonnie, who isn't Withered Bonnie here due to having a full mask, which is also then shown off in the dream cutscenes from this very game, explicitly showcasing the puppet alongside the classics from the first Freddy's location, and doing said process there. This imagery of the puppet being alongside the original 4 in the first location then gets reiterated with the second night's phone call in this game being all about the previous Freddy's location, yet also having a mention of the puppet alongside them, and that he quote never liked it, to further imply that Ralph has a history with it. Then there's all of the minigames featuring Charlie alongside the other 5, the teasers leading up to FNAF 6 like we talked about, with the rockstars in FNAF 6 itself, showing Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Lefty, who captures and represents the puppet as we all know, together in one group, group, being referenced in Secret of the Mimic with the old Fazbear designs, which we see to be the classics, right next to the puppet designs, which while the puppets mentioned here are most likely Fiona's real actual puppets, them being grouped together here does further imply this connection, as well as both the memory dolls and Fazforce figures in Help Wanted 2, with them all grouped together, and of course the full Fest poster we mentioned earlier, showcasing the puppet alongside the 4-member Freddy band. Said poster also just happens to have the puppet not only represented as dead, possessed, but actually in a security position for said Freddy's band, represented by being a scarecrow, further implying that the first Freddy's where it was only these 4 on stage is indeed where the security puppet minigame happens, which also correlates to how the bracelets the children wear just happen to share the same colours as the eyes of the original 4. This is then seemingly confirmed to be the case, with the Ticket to Fun book directly stating that all children attending parties at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza are provided with wristbands as a souvenir of their time at our establishment, and to easily track party attendees, where you can then use a UV light to reveal Charlie from the security puppet minigame with her green wristband, directly connecting her death to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza specifically, and not Fredbear's. This is further backed with how the entire book is all about the original Freddy's building, as while yes it features things from the FNAF 2 location in agony form, overall every single page within is specifically about the first building, which is the FNAF 1 building as well later in the timeline, only showing and outright stating that the only animatronics involved are the core 4. But even if it's practically confirmed with this book, I believe there's also one other place that this is all further hinted at, which no one talks about: the Paper Pals. Within this game we meet 3 Paper Pals, one of a Freddy due to its nuzzle, one of a bunny due to its rabbit ears, and one seemingly of the puppet due to its 3 buttons and giant mouth. And to back this up, interestingly enough in the future game Secret of the Mimic, we're introduced to another Jack-in-the-Box character named Jackie, a character who not only mimics the puppet in many ways, from its design/concept in itself, to the oil leaking representing the tears, to her jump scare playing Nightmarion's jump scare audio, to even the music box itself playing, but also seems to match the extra paper pal a little too well, possibly furthering that this paper pal is indeed meant to represent the puppet. But a big question this brought up is what actually connects these 3 characters together? Why didn't Scott make the 3rd be Chica to represent the main band on the show stage or something like that? What's the link here? Well, in the following game FNAF 3, only Paper Freddy and Paper Bonnie appear as secret Easter egg appearances out of thin air, while the Paper Puppet just stays in the box. Which, since it's a game all about Spring Bonnie and expanding the Fredbear's family dino lore, could be seen as a hint that they're meant to represent Fredbear, Golden Freddy, and Spring Bonnie, which could also be backed up with FNAF 2 itself, where specifically the Paper Puppet has a chance to teleport into the office, and leaves the other 2 behind, leaving them to be paired together yet again. I believe that this imagery could actually be showcasing William's murders and the timeline of said murders. Charlie's death represented by the puppet, since he took advantage of the puppet being trapped for it, the MCI represented by Bonnie, since he used the Springlock suit for it, and the DCI represented by the Freddy, since we theorized earlier that he used the Golden Freddy suit for it. So with all of the evidence I've gone over today, and the other alternatives seeming unlikely, I do believe we can set Charlie's death to be William's first murder in 1983, and outside the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. And guess what? This is all without even going in depth into the main smoking gun for this conclusion, the infamous Midnight Motorist minigame from FNAF 6. But of course we're not going into that can of worms right now in the FNAF 2 video, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss how that minigame heavily impacts this debate, and even helps us solve who the first death of the entire story is. Although death timeline aside, something interesting in Charlie's extended death minigame via the security puppet is that when Charlie died, the puppet seemingly didn't have tears. One of the most distinct and clear visual features of the puppet is suddenly gone and missing from that minigame. Was this just an inconsistency somehow, or something more serious? Well, interestingly enough, the only other times the puppet doesn't have tears is with its masked inclusion in the blob creature from Security Breach, as well as within the Happiest Day minigame in FNAF 3, with the puppet's mask attached to Charlie's spirit not having tears, which we know from this game that the masks on the characters represent the animatronic that the spirit possessed. Something interesting to note about that though, is the fact that it's not entirely true, as once the party occurs and the children are freed, the puppet mask turns from its previous form having no tears and grey into its real current form, now actually featuring the tears. And this is the only mask in the minigame to change in any way when it drops. Scott was directly showing us all the way back in FNAF 3 that it's not an inconsistency. There was a definitive special importance to the tears on the puppet's mask, and it wasn't on the animatronic when she first possessed it, despite being there now in reality. It was even shown further back in FNAF 2 that Charlie's tears were being highlighted as having some sort of special significance in her death. We then later learn in Sister Location that an animatronic being possessed may also change something visually on it, as within that game, Elizabeth's possession evidently causes Circus Baby to change from having her original blue eyes to her new green eyes. So the logical conclusion would be that Charlie's possession of the puppet was the real reason that the mask gained its infamous tears, explaining why the mask that Charlie's spirit has in Happiest Day doesn't have them despite it later showing that the real mask has them, and also explaining the reason that the Blob's puppet mask also has no tears too, since Charlie is freed by this point in time. And so if possession caused the tears to appear, then it no longer being possessed would simply cause the tears to disappear as well. This was also hinted at and referenced within the second movie, where after her death we saw that Charlie's spirit actually gained the tears from the puppet's mask, the direct opposite of what happens in the game universe. Speaking of the second movie though, and it also reveals to us the real reason that the puppet is able to be wound back by a simple music box. Henry stating that, "I made this music box for Charlotte when she was just a baby. The music, it helped her sleep," which Vanessa then reinforces later on. So it appears that when Charlie was younger, Henry made the music box to help her sleep. And while this may sound insane, he could have actually made the tune of My Grandfather's Clock in the FNAF universe, considering the real song was created by a man named Henry too. But back to the lore, and this meant that after she died and possessed the puppet, whenever the music box is played, it would then put Charlie back to sleep, or just calm her down, being reminded of her happier memories. And it seems that Game Henry likely knows of this too, which is then why the later animatronic Lefty has a dream wand / soother feature that also uses a lullaby once she's successfully within the suit to then try and keep her spirit calmed. All of this dead kid talk aside though, we learn back in the gameplay itself that once William runs away due to the investigation starting within the building, Jeremy is transferred to the day shift for one final birthday party the next day, and is specifically told,
Stay close to the animatronics and make sure they don't hurt anyone.
As we learn in FNAF 1 though, an event called the Bite of 87 occurs this year, which we haven't seen or heard about by this point, likely meaning that Jeremy is the victim of the bite on the final day that this Freddy is open. This is also backed up by the week before. Quote, staff spread tips around the restaurant on how to slow or stop the animatronics if they ever attacked again. End quote. You can't spell team without M&E. After the Bite of 87, you heard some of the staff twisted around to you can't spell team without MEAT, which both implied that the bite occurred to an employee and not a customer. But while we now have our victim, we're still left with the mystery of who caused the bite. Well, let's first try and figure out which specific group of animatronics to pick from. Was it one of the toys or the Withereds? As we heard Ralph mention, Jeremy was told to specifically stay close to the animatronics to prevent them from hurting anyone, implying that he was around one of the performing toy animatronics to cause the bite, as no customers would be near the Withereds in the back, and Ralph would have no reason to be referring to them here. This is also backed up with the week before stating, if only the victim could tell what he did to provoke the attack, but he doesn't talk anymore, or do much else, meaning that no animatronic was where it wasn't meant to be, such as the Withereds being out of the back room, as they simply assumed that he did something to one of the animatronics to then cause the bite. I will say now though that people say that the week before says Withered Foxy did the bite, with the quote, everything about this animatronic seems not for kids, which is probably why his attraction has been marked out of order for the reopening. Though as far as you know, he's never bitten any kids, with kids in italics to imply that he's bit an adult. And while at first I also assumed this was a clear direct confirmation, it should be noted that this isn't the only place an animatronic biting is referenced. Not only with Golden Freddy chomping down on Ralph as a recreation of the Bite of 83, but Freddy too with the quote, Freddy is close now. He opens his mouth. Freddy's face is inches from your head. He leans down. You wonder what it will be like living without your frontal lobe, which is actually more directly referencing the Bite of 87, which causes the person to lose their frontal lobe. And so I think the book is purposefully giving us a bunch of possible options just like the games did. But either way, one of the toys being the biter makes a lot of sense with the story that's being told throughout the game too, with it continuously building up the narrative about the toys being aggressive to a past employee, now to all adults, and then Jeremy is told to stay close to them, etc. It's crafting the perfect storm for the bite to occur as the conclusion and climax of that story. So we then have to figure out which toy animatronic caused the bite. Although once we start looking into each we start to see a clear winner, Mangle. Not only is she the only toy to have sharp teeth, as all the others specifically have blunt teeth, the only other in the whole game having sharp teeth being Withered Foxy, but he's also the only toy that has the ability to open up their jaws to the extent that she does in order to cause the bite. Toy Chica, the puppet, Withered Chica, and Withered Bonnie specifically are all shown to never be able to open their mouths at all, with Toy Freddy and Toy Bonnie being able to move their mouths slightly in Ultimate Custom Night, but still not wide enough to bite someone's head. I think Mangle being the biter is also implied very specifically with his jump scare, coming down from the ceiling to bite the player, hitting their frontal lobe first and foremost. Mangle being the biter also makes sense of the week before's mention of Foxy never biting kids. What eventually became the Mangle was officially treated as Foxy in every way. Through the game, Mangle also acts as the most sporadic and dangerous out of all the others, her radio constantly playing static, and he's completely broken. FNAF AR including voice lines that tell us how horrified she was with how he was treated, furthering the motivation for her to be the animatronic to act out and bite someone. In my opinion, when looking at all the evidence, it was honestly either Withered Foxy or Mangle straight away, and since we've deduced it's more likely to be a scheduled toy animatronic, and in this case an active attraction, I think the winner is clear, making Jeremy the victim to Mangle's bite that later becomes dubbed the Bite of 87. Although as we all know, Jeremy being transferred to the day shift and being bit there isn't actually the real ending of FNAF 2, as we can then play the Custom Night, which upon completing gets the brand new third guard of the location, Fritz Smith, fired. The reason Fritz gets fired is for tampering with animatronics and odor, which coincidentally mirrors the exact same reasons that Mike gets fired in FNAF 1, again for tampering with the animatronics and odor. Could this mean that Mike is actually the final FNAF 2 guard under a disguise? Well, I do think that it's extremely likely. Not only are the reasons the same, but the name used, Fritz Smith, is actually a combination of both Jeremy Fitzgerald and Mike Schmidt's names. Fritz coming from Fitz, while the surname Smith literally stands for Schmidt in German. Both just happen to use the surname specifically to craft their name. Not only that, but as we know, the kid possessing Foxy is named Fritz too. And later in the story, we see Mike wearing a Foxy mask and being connected to the character, making the name literally be Foxy Kid Schmidt as well. Although something not a lot of people have mentioned is that Henry's final speech in FNAF 6, where once he starts burning everything down and talking about the tragedies of the past, Mike, the player, sees the cameras of both the FNAF 1 and the FNAF 2 location. And these aren't actually on Henry's screen, or anything like the other images in his speech. These are specifically flashing in and out separately from his computer, directly implying that we're, in Mike's own perspective, remembering these locations and camera feeds, hinting that he was there in FNAF 2. Then if we head to the movie universe, the second movie contains Mike literally being a guard at the Toy Freddy's location, playing through a night there too, even recreating some shots from the gameplay itself. Not only that, but in the first movie, the training tape that Mike gets with his name on it has a faded out Fritz behind it, despite the previous guard being called Bob in the novelization, directly referencing this theory that Mike is Fritz, with seemingly no other reason for the name to be there. People may ask why Mike would use a fake name, but I think he's purely just hiding his connection to his father William, who is, remember, in real time under high suspicion again for a brand new set of murders. He then uses his first real name Michael by the time of FNAF 1, since all of the investigations have now entirely died down, and so he no longer needs to go that far, although still seemingly covering his last name using Schmidt, likely his mother's surname, instead of Afton to still avoid any unnecessary attention, and or rejecting his association. There's more direct evidence that Mike is almost definitely the FNAF 2 guard, but, and I hate to do this again, it comes from a later installment, FNAF 4, and requires a large explanation, since it's directly tied to solving that game as a whole, so I can't go into it now. But again, the evidence I've already given I personally think is enough solid ground to conclude that Mike is indeed Fritz in the game, and continuing the story of the Night Guard throughout the entire original story. Last but certainly not least, we need to talk about the two new rare chance Easter egg characters that can appear within this game. Shadow Freddy and Ruckafafaz Fazdax, Shadow Bonnie for short, the Shadow Animatronics. What are these shadow creatures? Well, we learned through a later game, FNAF AR Special Delivery, as well as the Fazbear Fright story Hide and Seek, that the shadows are heavily implied to be creatures that are manifestations of agony itself, as we established in the last video. Agony being emotional energy generated mainly due to a tragedy. So which tragedies from the story did each shadow manifest from? Well, as I mentioned in my full video about this very topic, as you start to look into all the evidence, especially as you add all the other games and books into the equation, it starts to get extremely complicated extremely quickly, once you realize that multiple shadows have multiple events tied to them, that would each be valid creation points, and then multiple of those same events are tied to multiple different shadows too. This line of thinking was then when a single simple solution clicked in my mind, which after presenting the idea and seeing the possible counterpoints, I still honestly agree with. What if all of the shadow entities through the franchise are actually one single agony entity instead, the Shadow? This entity would be feeding off of all the agony surrounding Fazbear Entertainment through the decades, and taking the form of the agony and the environment that it's specifically surrounded by. For example, within this game, the Shadow is taking the form of Shadow Freddy when it's surrounded by the agony of the MCI, simply hinted at with its appearance within the room they're sat in, sharing the look of God and Freddy specifically due to its influence from the agony of the crying child, thanks to the events that we'll see play out in FNAF 4. The Shadow then also takes the form of the toy-looking Shadow Bonnie, whenever it's freely roaming the building alongside the other toys, aka when in the main office, due to the agony that came from the DCI, elsewhere in the building from the Withereds. Of course, there's a lot more evidence to this theory and a full explanation on how literally each and every event in the FNAF lore somehow connects to a shadow creature, and also how I connected the shadows to one another as well. But since this is meant to be a video purely about the lore of FNAF 2, and this idea requires a lot of external games, books, etc., I highly recommend just checking out my video covering this exact idea instead. Otherwise, like I accidentally started doing, I'd basically be copy-pasting the exact same video here, which it's around 30 minutes in itself, and we're already done with the Shadow's purpose within this game anyways. So after all of that, oh my god, this franchise has so many details to keep track of, we can solidify for my final timeline that besides what we're directly told/shown, the FNAF 2 Freddy's was open for only 2 weeks, that William definitely killed another 5 kids, that then go on to possess the toy animatronics, the investigations of the DCI leading to the closure of the location, that the DCI kids are likely named Ron, Alana, Jacob, Lisa, and Jessica, that Charlie dies at the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in 1983, once possessing the puppet, Charlie gives the mask tears, that Charlie gives agency and memories to the MCI after they possess the classics, that the bite of 87 happens to Jeremy and was caused by Mangle, that Mike returns under the alias Fritz Smith, and that the Shadow animatronics are instead a single creature that I call the Shadow, manifesting from and surrounding the agony of Fazbear Entertainment throughout its history. So with every aspect of FNAF 2 answered, we can now move on to FNAF 3 to try and solve everything within it, coming next month. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. A big shout out to all my channel members, become one today. Please be respectful to everyone when discussing what are simply theories, and I really hope you all enjoyed, and have a great day/night. Bye!